On a rain-soaked evening in Baker Street, the lamps of London flickered against the gathering fog. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his eyes half closed yet his mind keenly alert. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops on the window was interrupted by the rustle of paper. Mrs. Hudson had just delivered a letter sealed with a crest unfamiliar to me. Holmes opened it with his usual precision, scanning its contents with a spark of curiosity that betrayed his otherwise languid demeanour. The letter came from Lady Eleanor Caldwell, mistress of an ancient estate in the northern countryside. Her words spoke of disturbances, most uncanny strange noises, echoing through deserted corridors, treasured heirlooms vanishing without a trace, and a growing fear that her family's legacy was under threat from within. What caught Holmes's attention, however, was not the tale of spectral whispers or missing valuables, but the peculiar phrasing she employed. It is not death that stalks our halls, but something colder still. Holmes, ever the enemy of the unexplained, leaned forward with quiet intensity. "Watson," he said, "this letter is not merely a cry of fear. It is a cipher of desperation. The lady suspects more than she dares to write." Thus began our journey to Caldwell Manor, a place steeped in history and shadow, where each stone seemed to hold secrets, and every face concealed a motive. I could not then foresee the peril we would encounter, nor the tangled web of lies, betrayal, and greed that Holmes would ultimately unravel. Chapter 1. A summons to the Manor was upon one of those damp October evenings, when the streets of London lay beneath a curtain of drizzle, and the smoke of countless chimneys hung low over Baker Street, that my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes found himself roused from the languor which occasionally beset him between cases. I had been engaged with my notes by the fire when Mrs. Hudson entered with a letter, the envelope of which bore a crimson seal of aristocratic distinction. Holmes, stretched in his chair with fingers steepled beneath his chin, sat up with an eagerness I had not seen in weeks. "Another bill, perhaps?" IJESTED. Holmes gave me one of his half-smiles. "Hardly, Watson. Observe the weight of the paper, the embossing of the crest, and the peculiar choice of sealing wax. This, my dear fellow, is not a demand for rent, but an invitation to mystery." He slit the envelope with his knife and scanned the contents, his grey eyes alight with interest. I noticed, even from my distance, the hurried hand of the writer and the uneven pressure of the pen strokes, as though penned in agitation. Holmes read aloud, "To Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I beg of you to extend your great talents toward an urgent matter afflicting my household. Caldwell Manor, my family's home for generations, has of late become host to disturbances of a most unsettling nature. Whispered voices echo where no person may be found, treasured heirlooms vanish from locked cabinets, and shadows move with purpose through deserted corridors. The staff grow restless, my kin distrust one another, and I myself fear for the legacy of my house. I entreat you, sir, to lend us your assistance, for it is not death that stalks our halls, but something colder still. Yours in desperation, Lady Eleanor Caldwell." Holmes folded the letter with deliberate care and set it upon the mantelpiece. For a moment he remained silent, staring into the fire. "Surely," I ventured, "the good lady exaggerates. Whispered voices and moving shadows, such tales belong more to novels than reality. Precisely why I find them compelling," Holmes replied. "Note her phrasing. Not death, but something colder still. This is no idle complaint, Watson. She fears a presence, yes, but beneath her words lies a deeper suspicion, one she dares not commit to paper." His eyes gleamed with that unmistakable spark which heralded the commencement of a new adventure. "Holmes," I said, closing my notebook with some exasperation, "you mean to drag us into the countryside on the word of a woman frightened by creaking doors?" He rose, reached for his violin, and plucked a single note before setting it aside again. "My dear doctor, you have accompanied me long enough to know that trifles are rarely trifles. When examined closely, they reveal crimes most grave. This Lady Caldwell, by her diction and breeding, is unlikely to indulge in superstition. The disturbances she describes may be the outward symptoms of a design most calculated." I sighed. though in truth the prospect of a country estate mystery stirred no small excitement within me. Very well. When do we depart? Holmes consulted the letter once more. The first train north tomorrow morning shall suffice. Pack lightly, Watson. I suspect we shall be engaged longer than a day's excursion. The following morning found us upon the platform at Euston, shivering against the bite of autumn air. Holmes stood with his hands in his overcoat pockets, gazing absently at the steam that rose in great clouds from the waiting locomotive. He had spoken little since dawn, yet I knew by the quick rhythm of his tapping fingers against his thigh that his mind was occupied with conjectures. Our journey north was conducted in near silence, broken only by Holmes's occasional muttered observation as he reread Lady Caldwell's letter. Outside, the countryside rolled past, grey and sodden under a sky heavy with rain. As the miles advanced, my anticipation mounted. What manner of house was Caldwell Manor? What breed of disturbances had so unsettled its mistress? By mid-afternoon, the train slowed into a small rural station. A carriage awaited us, its driver wrapped in a thick cloak and cap. He touched his broom respectfully. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen, her ladyship sent me to fetch you. Caldwell Manor lies some 7 miles hence." The ride carried us through winding lanes, bordered by ancient oaks, their branches skeletal against the dull heavens. The air grew colder with every mile, and soon the turrets of a great house appeared upon a distant rise. Caldwell Manor stood grim and imposing, its grey stone walls darkened by centuries of weather. A single light burned in an upper window, faint against the gathering dusk. Holmes regarded the estate with keen scrutiny. "Observe, Watson, the architecture. Tudor foundations with later Gothic additions. A house grown not by design, but necessity, like the family within, perhaps." We were received at the great oak doors by Lady Eleanor herself. She was a woman of middle years, her face pale with strain, yet composed with dignity. Her eyes, dark and searching, lingered upon Holmes with something approaching relief. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you cannot know how grateful I am that you have come." Holmes inclined his head. "We are at your service, madam. Pray, lead us within." The entrance hall of Caldwell Manor was vast, its vaulted ceiling hung with cobwebs of shadow cast by a solitary chandelier. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow our progress. Lady Eleanor guided us into a drawing room, where a fire struggled to warm the chill that pervaded the air. As we took our seats, she spoke in a low, measured tone. "You must forgive me if I appear overwrought, gentlemen. This house has been my family's seat 4 generations, yet never have I felt so besieged. Objects vanish in the night, though locks remain unbroken. Servants whisper of footsteps when none walk the halls. My nephews quarrel with increasing bitterness, each suspecting the other of mischief. And last week, I heard a voice, my late husband's voice, calling my name from the corridor outside my chamber." Her hands trembled as she clasped them together. I glanced at Holmes, expecting a dismissive smile. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes intent. "Lady Caldwell, you spoke in your letter of something colder than death. What precisely did you mean?" She shuddered. "It is a sense, sir, as though the very walls conspire against us. A chill that seeps deeper than mere draughts. I fear not only for our sanity, but for our lives." Holmes remained silent for several moments, then rose abruptly. He paced the length of the room, his gaze darting to the windows, the hearth, the very grain of the wood panelling. At last, he turned to our hostess. "Lady Caldwell, rest assured, the secrets of this house shall not remain hidden. You spoke of whispers, shadows, and thefts. I assure you, each has a rational cause. It is my task to uncover it." Her expression softened, though the shadow of fear remained. "Then you accept the case, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes gave a slight bow. "With the utmost urgency, madam, for I believe that beneath these disturbances lies a design most deliberate and most dangerous." Chapter 2. The shadowed estate. Had I been inclined, upon first entering Caldwell Manor, to attribute our hostess's apprehensions to nerves and draughts, the impression of the house soon disabused me. There are dwellings so saturated with history that the air seems to carry a residue of the past. Caldwell was of that brood. The oak, dark with age, gave out a resinous, almost medicinal scent. The floors murmured beneath each step, and the long corridor stretching from the drawing-room into gloom, if ashamed of its own length. Holmes, having given Lady Eleanor his assurance, proposed an immediate tour of the principal rooms. Our hostess, anxious to oblige, took up a candelabrum and led the way through the hall. The portraits of the Caldwells, baronets and bankers, soldiers and sombre ladies regarded us with painted indifference. "You will wish to meet my family," Lady Eleanor said over her shoulder. "My brother, Mr. Alistair Goring, is in the library. My nephews, Victor and Edwin Caldwell, inhabit the east wing when they are not busy quarrelling in my presence." "A most fatiguing pastime," Holmes murmured, "but I am eager to see both men and masonry. Houses, like families, betray themselves in their joinery." We entered the library, a high, handsome chamber whose shelves rose so tall that a rolling ladder clung to the cornice like an insect. A fire burned low. Mr. Alistair Goring, a gentleman of spare figure and careful dress, rose to greet us with a ceremonious bow. His hair, prematurely white, had the snowy neatness of a precise mind. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, the house is at your disposal, though I confess I do not share my sister's alarm. Noises in old timbers will make themselves heard." Holmes's eye had already travelled from the blotched inkstand to the ashtray upon a side table, where a cigarette, extinguished with unusual force, had left a fan of crushed paper. "You are a smoker, Mr. Goring." "Occasionally. Then you will forgive a professional curiosity. These are Egyptian, of a brand imported by Marlborough and Cobb, rare in the countryside. A visitor with cosmopolitan tastes has called upon you in recent days." Goring smiled thinly. "One cannot police a gentleman's choice of tobacco." "Certainly not," Holmes said, and the matter was allowed to rest, a station in his mind marked for later use. From the library, we passed into a music room, where an elegant pianoforte presided with severe grace, and thence to the dining hall, a chamber of echoes with a vast table and 12 rigid chairs, as though expecting a council of war. Holmes lagged behind us, studying door plates, skirting boards, and the undersides of windows with an attention that made Lady Eleanor's brows knit in perplexity. "Forgive me," he said at last, crouching near a window embrasure, "but this house has the habit of keeping secrets. Note, Watson, the dust upon the sill. All is even, save for this faint crescent twice disturbed by a thumb no larger than a woman's. The latch bears the same mark. Do you often open these windows, Lady Eleanor?" "Very seldom. The wind makes them complain dreadfully, and yet someone has opened this one within the week. Observe also the faint impression on the carpet, heel and toe, narrow, perhaps a slipper, a small foot, and cautious." Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "None of the maids are allowed in here at night." "Precisely," Holmes said, and rose, his face as expressionless as if he had been examining a fossil. "Let us meet your nephews." They awaited us in a sitting room overlooking the east lawn. Victor Caldwell, the elder by a year or two, had the open hands and confident posture of a man whose habits, if not his conscience, are robust. He was dark, well-favoured, with an athletic ease ill-suited to the dim room. Edwin, by contrast, was paler, with delicate features, a habit of blinking, and a nervous smile that came and went without ever fully arriving. "Mr. Holmes," Victor said, "if you can conjure away whispers with logic, I will name a horse after you." Holmes bowed. "A compliment I shall earn by more economical means than bloodstock, I hope. Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, what do you hear in the dark?" "Wind, mostly," Victor replied carelessly. "And Edwin's bedroom door, which takes to yawning at unholy hours." Edwin coloured. "I heard steps 2 nights ago," he said, addressing me rather than Holmes, as timid folk will confide in a medical man. Soft, deliberate, as if someone counted each plank. Then a tap, not at my door, but upon the panel at the end of the corridor. When I got up, there was nothing. Holmes's attention sharpened. "A panel, you say? Describe it." "It is plain, sir. I doubt I would have noticed it but for the tap." It seems part of the wainscot. Holmes glanced at Lady Eleanor. Have you knowledge of concealed doors in this house? My late husband spoke once of priest holes, she replied. Caldwell is older than its additions admit, but if such exist, they were never disclosed to me. Excellent, Holmes said in a tone that made my skin prickle. We shall let the walls speak later. He made a circuit of the room, engaged the brothers in a few seemingly idle questions, who retired late, who had keys, whether the servants were old retainers or newly hired. It emerged that a senior footman, Archer, had departed abruptly a fortnight before, that the housekeeper, Mrs. Bligh, had served the family 15 years, and that a certain under-gardener had been seen with a bottle not issued by the cellar. You observe, Watson, Holmes said, once we had withdrawn, the agreeable harmony of an old household, wherein every cog has recently been moved one notch from its place. We were conducted next to Lady Eleanor's chamber in the west wing. The corridor to it was narrow and lined with small, grim landscapes, a shepherd lost in a snow, a ship labouring under black clouds. Within, the room was all propriety and lavender, a neat writing desk, a mirror with wavy glass, a bell pull near the bed. Holmes went at once to the bell. You rang this, perhaps, when you heard the voice. I did, and no one came. Later the maid told me the bell never sounded in the kitchen. Holmes stooped to examine the cord, where it disappeared into the ceiling cornice. He produced from his pocket a small lens and a penknife. With the latter he teased out from the tassel a pale filament. He held it to the candle flame. It curled and blackened with a faint animal odour. Hot air, he observed, handing me the lens, spliced into the cord and knotted to jam the pulley. It would fail by day, when the drag is gentle, but at night, when one tugs in haste, the knot tightens and holds. Someone wished to silence your alarm, Lady Eleanor. She caught the bedpost with her hand and swayed. Then I am not mad. Mad? No, Holmes said, and there was a gentleness in his voice I had seldom heard. You are persecuted. The only question is by whom and to what end. We left her with assurances of protection, and proceeded by Holmes's request to the end of Edwin's corridor. There, half lost in the gloom, was a panel in the wainscot, plain indeed, save that the grain at one edge bore a faint polish where many fingers had sought it. Holmes set his palm to the wood. Watson, your shoulder. If you please. I braced, he pressed. The panel yielded a fraction, then sprang back with a squeal like a trapped mouse. Holmes smiled, finger to lips. Not yet, he whispered. The mouse best performs when it believes the cat asleep. He knelt to the skirting, sniffed, and touched a dark speck with his forefinger. Oil lantern, oil fresh. Our phantom is no friend of open flames. We dined with the family at 8 o'clock. Conversation limped. Mr. Goring discoursed with toying emphasis upon Roman coins unearthed in a neighbouring field. Victor, with a sportsman's indifference, spoke of a troublesome mare. Edwin barely touched his plate. Lady Eleanor maintained her poise with effort, and more than once I felt the peculiar chill of the house settle upon us, as though a window had opened and shut unseen. After the ladies withdrew, there were none, in truth, save our hostess. We men adjourned to the library. Holmes declined wine and asked for coffee. He stood at the hearth with his cup, the firelight cutting the lean planes of his face into austere relief. Gentlemen, he said, it is my custom to speak plainly. There is a hand at work in this house, a human hand that meddles with cords, opens latches, and treads where it ought not. Its owner is familiar with the plan of Caldwell and moves with confidence in the dark. Whether he seeks treasure, terror, or both, I have not yet determined, but I shall ask your cooperation. Victor's eyes brightened. A watch, a trap, a pattern, Holmes replied. Mr. Goring, you will oblige me by remaining this evening in your rooms and smoking, if you must, in the conservatory, whose windows I have reason to admire. Mr. Edwin, you will go to bed at your accustomed hour and sleep, or convincingly feign it. Mr. Victor, you will contrive to be seen lingering with the butler over the ports until after midnight. I shall take a promenade with Dr. Watson at 11. Goring lifted a brow. You arrange us as chessmen, as pawns, knights, and a rook, Holmes said, with a flicker of a smile. The king, for the moment, remains in shadow. Later, when we were alone in our assigned chamber cold, with a draught beneath the door that set the candle guttering, Holmes unpacked from his valise a coil of black silk, a compass, and a small, dark lantern of curious make. "You are armed, Watson." "I am." "Excellent. We shall not need it, if fortune smiles. But if she proves coy, the sight of steel has been known to hasten her favors. At 11 we walk, at 1:30 we listen, and at midnight," he snapped the lantern shut with a soft click, "we shall ask Caldwell Manor one or two intimate questions through that obliging panel, the corridor's end." He stretched upon the coverlet, boots and all, and closed his eyes. Chapter 3. The whisper in the corridor. It was a little before 11 when Holmes roused himself from his feigned slumber and signalled me to prepare. The candle had long guttered out, leaving our chamber in near darkness. Only the glow of embers in the fireplace traced faint patterns upon the ceiling. Outside, the house was still, save for the occasional groan of timber as the October wind pressed against the old walls. Holmes, ever precise, wrapped his dark scarf about his throat, slipped his revolver into one pocket and his lantern into another. "Watson," he whispered, "we must walk as men who have no destination, yet every purpose. Silence is our ally, but in silence also lies our adversary." We stepped into the corridor. The chill struck me at once, though the fire in Lady Eleanor's chamber had been strong when we last saw it. The passage stretched long and narrow, lined with those grim landscapes of storm and shipwreck I had noted earlier. By the flicker of Holmes's shielded lantern, each painted scene seemed to shift and stir, the shepherd perishing anew in the snow, the ship eternally labouring beneath black clouds. Holmes motioned me forward, then paused abruptly, holding one hand aloft. A faint sound, so faint I thought it my imagination, echoed from the far end of the corridor. A whisper, not the rustle of curtains, nor the sigh of draughts, but a measured, deliberate susurration, as if the voices spoke in anxious counsel. Holmes inclined his head, listening with the intensity of a hound at scent. "Not wind," he breathed, "words." I strained my ears. A fragment reached me indistinct, but human. Then a sudden tap, sharp and hollow, against wood. Holmes's eyes flashed. He drew me toward the concealed panel Edwin had described. "There," he whispered. "The mouse stirs." He set his hand upon the panel's edge, feeling along the grain. With his other he slipped the dark lantern open a hair's breadth, allowing a thread of light to fall. The wood revealed a faint groove, nearly invisible, where countless openings had worn the edge. Holmes pressed gently. The panel yielded, sliding inward with barely a murmur. A breath of colder air issued forth, carrying with it the unmistakable tang of oil and damp stone. Beyond yawned a narrow passage, descending into shadow. Holmes's face, lit by the dim glow, was alive with grim satisfaction. "Watson, we stand at the throat of the enigma." We had little time for further examination. A sudden scrape echoed below, followed by the distinct clink of metal. Holmes extinguished the lantern with a swift motion and drew me back into the cover of the corridor. In the darkness we waited, every nerve straining. Slowly, carefully, the sound of footsteps ascended the hidden stair. They were deliberate, cautious, pausing now and then as though the climber feared discovery. At last, a sliver of dim yellow light spilled through the panel's edge. The figure beyond carried a lantern of his own. Holmes's grip tightened on my arm. "Not yet," he whispered, scarcely audible. The panel slid outward. A shadow emerged, a cloaked figure, face obscured by the lantern's glare. He stepped into the corridor, glanced left and right, then moved with purpose toward Lady Eleanor's wing. Holmes darted forward noiselessly, his hand poised to seize. But just as he made his move, the intruder turned sharply, as though warned by instinct, and fled down the passage. His lantern swung wildly, casting grotesque shapes upon the walls. "After him, Watson!" Holmes cried. We gave chase, our boots striking the boards in sharp pursuit. The figure dashed through the corridor, rounded a corner, and vanished into the dark. Holmes's lantern flared again, revealing the glimmer of a trailing cloak. Yet, when we reached the junction, the corridor was empty. Holmes halted, breathing hard but controlled. He turned his lantern low, sweeping the floor. "Observe," he muttered. The carpet bore faint impressions, narrow, pointed, the tread of a man's boot. They led toward a small door, half hidden by a tapestry. Holmes thrust it open. Beyond lay a servant's stair spiraling downward into the blackness. From below came the echo of retreating steps, swift and confident. "He knows the house," Holmes said grimly. "We might pursue, but the warren of passages would favor him. Better to learn where he emerges." We descended cautiously, but by the time we reached the lower hall the intruder had vanished utterly. Only a faint draught remained, bearing with it the scent of extinguished oil. Holmes crouched by the flagstones, where droplets gleamed faintly in the lantern's glow. He touched them with his finger, then held it to his nose. Not water, kerosene. Spilled in haste. He carried more than a lantern, Watson. He carried fire. The implication chilled me. You believe Tarson, perhaps, or a threat of it. But fire is a weapon of desperation, not of strategy. Our adversary prefers the cloak of mystery. He shall not yet risk open destruction. We returned to our chamber, finding the house still undisturbed. Holmes seated himself upon the edge of the bed, his eyes distant. "You saw the tread," he said. "A man's, not a woman's. The cloak, the lantern, the sureness of step all point to one who has trod these passages often. A servant, most likely, or one of the family with private knowledge." "Did you note his height?" "Medium," I replied. "No taller than myself, perhaps a shade less." "Precisely. That excludes Goring, who is taller by half a head, and Victor, whose athletic frame would hardly pass unnoticed. Edwin, yes, Edwin might fit, though his nerves hardly commend him to midnight wanderings. Yet nervous men commit bold acts when driven. We must keep all possibilities open." He lapsed into silence, his gaze fixed upon the dying embers. I knew better than to disturb him, for in such moments his mind ranged like a falcon, circling above the field of evidence until the prey revealed itself. At length he spoke. "Watson, tomorrow we shall examine that passage by daylight. Therein lies the key to Caldwell's unrest. But tonight we have learned two things of value. First, that the whispers are human, not spectral. Second, that the hand behind them is willing to risk discovery in pursuit of his aim. That aim we shall uncover." I confess I lay awake long after Holmes had stretched himself to sleep, the image of that cloaked figure haunting my thoughts. The whisper in the corridor was no mere fancy. It was the voice of a conspiracy, breathing through the cracks of an ancient house. What purpose it served, I could not guess. But I knew with the certainty of dread that our peril at Caldwell Manor had only begun. Chapter 4. Family ties and bitter feuds rose early, though the house, like a bruised giant, seemed reluctant to stir. Holmes would have gone straight to the hidden stair, but he elected first to harvest what he called the crop of characters, which, he maintained, ripens at breakfast as nowhere else. The family assembled in the east-facing morning room where pale light crept over the lawns and turned the silver service to a wan glow. Lady Eleanor greeted us with a composure that barely veiled her fatigue. Mr. Alistair Goring, immaculate as ever, perused the Times with a cool, abstracted air. Victor entered with the breezy vigor of a sportsman, and clapped Edwin on the shoulder, so heartily that the younger man spilled his tea, and blushed an apology to the table itself. Holmes accepted coffee, then proceeded, with that courteous incisiveness which is his most disarming instrument, to draw forth the threads that bound these persons to the house and to one another. "You were all fond of Caldwell," he began lightly, "but affection rarely runs in a straight line. Houses such as this engage our pride, our purse, and our tempers." Victor laughed. "My temper, perhaps. My purse less than my aunt's solicitors would prefer. The upkeep of old stones is an exercise in arithmetic more punishing than Greek. Lady Eleanor's mouth tightened. Victor exaggerates to amuse. The estate is strained, yes, but not imperiled. Goring lowered his newspaper by a measured inch. Expenditure is a habit, sister. Once acquired, it may be as ruinous as any vice. We must retrench, retrench. Victor echoed, cheerful, turning tart. Sell the broodmares. Lay off the men who have sired these fields since Waterloo. You speak as one who does not carry the work upon his back, Uncle Alistair. Nor do you, Goring returned, the politeness of his tone sharpening his words. Unless one counts the saddle as a ledger. Edwin set down his cup with a delicate clink. Pray, do not quarrel before Mr. Holmes. He has come to deliver us from whispers, not auditors. Holmes's glance flicked, hawk-like, from one to the other. I am content to observe the auditors also. They often speak in subtraction, which is a dialect of motive. Tell me, Mr. Goring, does the management of the family finances fall to you? It does, at Lady Eleanor's request. And the inheritance? Holmes's voice was mild, his eyes anything but. Pardon my plainness. Wills are the bones of many a household quarrel. Lady Eleanor answered with a dignity that was not without sorrow. My late husband's will leaves Caldwell to me for life. Then to the elder of my sister's sons Victor. Certain annuities are secured for Edwin. And for my brother. Victor gave a little bow that was almost gallant. Edwin's fingers tightened in his lap. Goring showed no more colour than a porcelain bust. Holmes nodded, as though confirming some internal diagram. A simple line, then life interest, then entail. Simplicity is rarely popular. It offends those who stand aside. No one stands aside. Lady Eleanor said quietly. All are provided for. Provision may be felt as a favour by one, and an insult by another. Holmes returned. It is the psychology of expectation. He rose. If you will indulge me, I should like a few words with each of you apart. He began with Goring in the library. I remained, at his request, and stood by the fire, outwardly attentive to a volume of Addison, while Holmes, with the gentle persistence of a physician, applied questions like tests to the elder man's composure. You were sceptical of your sister's alarms, he said. Yet you remain at Caldwell. My sister desires my presence. I am her only near relation, of her own generation. Besides, he permitted himself a wintry smile. I have a fondness for Roman coins and a detachment from London dinners, and for Egyptian cigarettes. Holmes's fingers drifted to the ashtray with an idle air that deceived no one. Goring followed the motion. Did not blink. Imported by a friend. I trust the brand is not yet indictable. Not yet, Holmes agreed. You keep late hours, Mr. Goring. Late enough to hear my sermons in the wainscot. Holmes bent over the grate. If the mice preach, do they also work the bell pull? Someone spliced horsehair into Lady Eleanor's cord to jam the pulley. For the first time, Goring's mask showed a seam. That is, unpardonable, unpardonable. Holmes echoed softly, unpurposeful. Whoever tied that knot desired silence hers. He straightened. Pray accept a final question. Do you consider Caldwell safer in your hands than in Victor's? Goring's gaze met his without heat. I consider Caldwell safer in competent hands. Holmes let the answer settle like dust and bowed. The interview closed. Victor presented himself next, tapping a riding crop against his boot. He submitted to Holmes's inquiries with an air of good-humoured impatience that, in any other man, might have passed for candour. You are to inherit the manor, Holmes said. It must be a heavy prospect to carry in the pocket, Mr. Caldwell. Victor grinned. A castle in the pocket is draughty, sir. I would mend the roofs, modernize the stables, throw open the park twice a year, so the village can laugh at our pretensions. And if the gods are kind, hunt less and work more. There, will the court of public opinion forgive me? Public opinion is unmoved by plans and persuaded by sums, Holmes said. Do your sums admit of such benevolences? They do if the sale of a London townhouse goes through. Holmes glanced, almost lazily, at the crop. You are out late of nights. If the moon is decent, last night. Victor hesitated, then shrugged. I was with old Wickham in the butler's pantry, as arranged, arguing the merits of port I cannot afford. Ask him. I shall. Holmes murmured. Edwin arrived last, pale and precise, his hands worrying a handkerchief into geometries. Holmes softened his manner by some subtle, humane instinct that I have never ceased to admire in him when weak nerves are in the scales with truth. "Mr. Edwin," he said, "you were disturbed 2 nights ago by a tapping at the panel. Will you tell me what you fear?" Edwin's voice was very low. "Ridicule, and the future, the future," Holmes prompted. "My brother is not unkind," Edwin said quickly, as though repeating a lesson, "but one does not wish to be a pensioner in one's own home. I am better with figures and horses. I might do something with the estate's accounts, were I allowed. Uncle thinks me," he faltered, and tried. Holmes supplied gently, "Yes." Holmes's gaze flicked to the thin wrists. The nervous blink. "You walk at night?" "Rarely." He flushed. "I read. Sometimes I cannot sleep. And the library is warmer than my room. Last night I slept badly," Edwin admitted. "I heard a step. Not yours. Not," as he swallowed. "Not Victor's." Holmes dismissed him with thanks and a word that moved the young man more than it ought. Useful. When the door closed, Holmes stood long by the window, his profile cut clean against the morning light. "Well," I ventured, "their motives, Watson, are recorded in 3 notes," he said. "Goring's competence chafes at Victor's inheritance. Victor's energy chafes at the purse. Edwin's pride chafes at his annuity. None of these, taken singly, is a crime. Combined, they may be the weather in which crime thrives." He rang for the butler. Wickham proved a sepulchral man whose years had settled upon him like dust. He confirmed Victor's alibi with austere accuracy, added that Mr. Goring had walked the conservatory until near 1, and that Mr. Edwin's candle went out at 11:30, who sits up in the servants' hall. Holmes asked, "Mrs. Bligh?" "Sir, till 10. After that the scullery maid snores at her post and the footman diced till they hear my tread." "And Archer, the footman who left why so sudden a departure?" Wickham's mouth compressed. "A bottle, sir, and a temper. He made free with the under-gardener's sister. Mrs. Bligh would have none of it. He was gone within the day." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Within the day and a fortnight passed. The disturbances began before or after?" "After," Wickham said, "though some will have it that the house had a feeling upon it since Michaelmas." "A feeling," Holmes repeated absently. "Thank you, Wickham. You will oblige me with the key to the east corridor, one that opens quietly, left alone." Holmes crossed to the mantel, where Lady Eleanor's letter lay in his pocket-book, and took instead a small coil of black silk and the curious dark lantern. He handled them not as tools, but as tuning forks. "Watson," he said at length, "we have the map of passions. Now we must marry it to the map of the house." He shot me a quick, bright look. "Men lie? Wood does not. This afternoon we shall descend the stair behind the panel. But first one more conversation." "With whom?" "Mrs. Bligh," he said. "Houses speak, but housekeepers remember. She will tell us what has truly vanished, and what has merely strayed," as if conjured by his words. There came a tap at the door. Mrs. Bligh entered, a tall woman of firm jaw and firmer principles, with the air of one who has stitched a family together through more winters than she has fingers to count. "Beg pardon, sir," she said to Holmes, eyes taking him in as she would a new broom, "but her ladyship asks if you will examine the west gallery. There's a cabinet there, Sir Percival's, where an item is missing since last night." Holmes's face altered by a fraction, the glint of a blade freshly honed. "An item," he repeated. "A miniature, sir. Her ladyship's wedding miniature, gone from a locked case." Holmes did not look at me, yet I felt his thought as clearly as if it had been spoken. The game, which had hesitated at the edge of the cover, had broken into the open. "Mrs. Bligh," he said, already in motion, "kindly lead the way." And in that instant the bitter arithmetic of family, purse, and pride began to tally itself in a new column theft whose sum, as Holmes would shortly show us. Chapter 5. The vanished heirloom. West gallery of Caldwell Manor stretched long and solemn, a museum of family pride. Portraits of ancestors gazed down with imperious eyes. Suits of armour stood like silent sentinels. At the far end stood a cabinet of carved walnut, its glass panes catching the pale daylight that filtered through stained windows. Within it, or rather within it once, had rested a miniature of Lady Eleanor on her wedding day, a likeness she confessed was dearer to her than all the plates and jewels in the house. Holmes bent over the lock with quick, delicate movements. He held his lantern close, shielding the flame with his palm. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "No sign of forced entry. The wards of the lock are untouched. Whoever took the miniature had either a key, or a hand so cunning as to fashion one." Lady Eleanor clasped her hands before her. "The key has never left my possession. It lies even now in my desk." Holmes turned the lock, with a borrowed skeleton key, from his own pouch. The mechanism yielded without resistance. A simple design, I fear. A smith could reproduce it in an hour. More telling, however, is this. He indicated the velvet lining of the shelf. A faint impression marked where the miniature had rested beside it. A trace of oil, scarcely larger than a tear. I bent close. "Lantern oil again." Holmes nodded. "The same as last night. Our visitor carries his lamp too carelessly. It betrays him." Victor, who had followed with casual swagger, gave a low whistle. "So we have a thief among us. What next, Mr. Holmes? Shall we frisk the servants?" "Impatience is not investigation," Holmes returned coldly. "The thief wishes us to suspect the servants. Therefore we must suspect otherwise." Edwin spoke for the first time, his voice trembling. "But why take the miniature? It is of no value outside this house." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "it is of inestimable value if one intends to wound Lady Eleanor. Theft, in such a case, is not for profit, but for leverage. And leverage is the weapon of blackmail." Lady Eleanor paled visibly. "Blackmail? What purpose could it serve?" Holmes did not answer at once. He paced the gallery, his eyes travelling over every inch of floor and wall. At length he crouched near the skirting. "Note this, Watson." A faint scuff, as of a boot dragged sideways, marred the polish. "Someone lingered here, perhaps listening. The gallery is adjacent to the west corridor, the very one that contains Lady Eleanor's chamber. Our thief not only steals, he eavesdrops." At that moment Mrs. Bly entered, her expression stern as stone. "Beg pardon, my lady, but I have spoken with the maids. None set foot here after supper. I swear it on my years in this house." Holmes regarded her keenly. "You are loyal, Mrs. Bly. Loyalty is rare, yet loyalty does not prevent others from abusing it. Tell me, who dusts this cabinet?" "The parlour maid, twice a week." "And the last occasion?" "Thursday, sir. Today is Saturday," Holmes said softly. "Then the theft occurred within 48 hours, most likely last night, precisely when our cloaked visitor roamed the corridors." Victor frowned. "You mean to say the fellow in the cloak took the miniature? Then why not seize the silver, or the jewels in my aunt's casket?" "Because jewels can be traced, but sentiment cannot," Holmes said. "Our thief seeks not wealth but power, to unsettle, to intimidate, to divide." He turned abruptly to Lady Eleanor. "Madam, has any letter or demand reached you since these disturbances began?" "None." "Then one will arrive." "Of that I am certain." Holmes asked for writing materials. When they were brought, he took several sheets of thick notepaper from Lady Eleanor's desk and examined them under the lens. He compared the watermark with scraps he produced from his pocketbook. "Excellent," he said at last. "When the letter comes, we shall know whether it springs from within or without." Our inquiries were interrupted by a commotion below. Raised voices echoed through the hall. Holmes strode swiftly to the staircase. I followed. There, at the foot of the steps, stood Wickham the butler, his dignity inflamed, grappling with a younger footman who protested his innocence. "He was in the gallery, sir," Wickham declared. "I found him skulking, and he ran." The footman, a fair lad named Thomas, shook his head wildly. "I was fetching coals, sir, nothing more." Holmes stepped between them, his presence instantly commanding. "Enough, Thomas. Did you enter the west gallery?" "I passed through, sir, only to reach the coal scuttle." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Coal, in the west gallery. Curious, for there is no hearth there. The boy faltered, then stammered. I was mistaken. I mean the drawing room. Lies unravel like cheap thread, Holmes said. But your lie is clumsy, not cunning. That makes you a scapegoat, not a thief. Who set you to carry coals where no fire burns? Thomas looked bewildered. No one, sir. I swear it. Holmes released him with a dismissive wave. Go, and keep your honesty tighter than your tongue. Wickham looked scandalized, but Holmes ignored him. We returned to the gallery where silence reigned. Lady Eleanor's eyes searched Holmes's face with desperate hope. Mr. Holmes, she said softly, do you believe this villain aims at my family's ruin? I believe, madam, Holmes replied, that he aims at more than ruin. He seeks to fracture loyalty, to set nephew against nephew, brother against sister, servant against master. Already suspicion corrodes the mortar of this house. That, Lady Eleanor, is his true design. Holmes examined the cabinet once more. He traced the outline of the missing miniature with his finger, then straightened with resolve. The theft is a message, he said. The message is, I move unseen. I strike where you are weakest, and I know your secrets. Whether those secrets are real or imagined does not matter. The terror is equal, Victor muttered darkly. When I catch the blackguard, I'll wring the secret from him with my own hands. Holmes fixed him with a cold eye. Anger is a blunt instrument, Mr. Caldwell. Better we use a scalpel. He turned to me with a sudden light in his eyes. Watson, tonight we watch not the panel, but the gallery. For our thief must return. He has left too loud a footprint, and when he returns, we shall be waiting. Thus the vanished miniature became not merely a theft, but a gauntlet thrown at our feet. Caldwell Manor, with its whispering corridors and haunted faces, had declared open war upon us. Chapter 6. The Secret Chamber. Holmes awoke me before dawn, his eyes alight with the energy of one who has lain half the night in thought rather than slumber. He stood already dressed, his dark coat buttoned to the throat, and in his hand he carried the little dark lantern whose glow had guided us before. Come, Watson, he said briskly. Our adversary has left us a staircase. Let us see where it leads in daylight. Few crimes can endure the scrutiny of the morning sun. The manor was hushed, its household not yet astir. We stole along the corridor to the panel Edwin had indicated. With a pressure of his palm, Holmes slid it back, and once again the breath of chill stone met us. This time, with the lantern's steady beam, we descended. The stair was narrow, twisting, and steep, the walls rough with ancient masonry. Dust lay thick, yet here and there footprints marred it fresh, distinct, and leading both up and down. Holmes bent to examine them. Note the heel, Watson, narrow, with a curious wear upon the outer edge. The same print I saw upon the gallery floor. The same oil smear, too. He touched a dark stain along the wall where a lantern had brushed in passing. We descended 20 steps before reaching a small landing where the passage forked. One branch slanted upward, toward the east wing, the other downward into deeper gloom. Holmes chose the latter. Criminals, like water, flow downward. He remarked. At the stair's end we came upon a stout oak door, bound with iron. Holmes tried the latch. It yielded after some effort, creaking upon hinges that had not sung in many years. Beyond lay a low chamber, the air damp and stale, the floors scattered with debris. Our lantern revealed shelves of worm-eaten wood, broken trunks, and the remnants of old furniture, but in one corner lay objects of greater interest. Holmes knelt, brushing aside dust. There lay several maps, folded but brittle with age, a bundle of journals tied with frayed cord, and a small coffer secured by a rusted lock. Ah, Holmes exclaimed softly, the manor has not only skeletons in its closets, Watson, but archives in its bowels. He untied one journal and opened it. The ink was faded, but legible. I read over his shoulder. In these rooms we must conduct our meetings. The old faith is persecuted. Here we shall find refuge. The passages serve as sanctuary, and the family, though outwardly loyal to crown and church, will in secret shield us. A priest hole, Holmes said. Caldwell once sheltered recusants. These chambers have seen more dangerous whispers than those Lady Eleanor describes. He leafed through another journal. And here notes of shipments, debts, and arrangements. Smuggling. Watson. Caldwell's ancestors turned their faith into commerce. The coffer, when prized open, yielded curiosities, a miniature crucifix of gold, several coins foreign to England, and a dagger whose blade bore strange markings. Holmes examined each with clinical detachment. History is an excellent alibi, he remarked. Crimes long dead are blamed for crimes newly born. But our thief is no ghost of the Reformation. He uses these passages today. Note, Watson, the dust disturbed near the coffer. Someone has searched here recently. Indeed, the dust lay in uneven patches, as though brushed aside by hurried hands. One of the journals was newer, its binding scarcely worn. Holmes opened it and scanned quickly. Dates within the year, he said. Entries of accounts cryptic, but in a modern hand. Whoever wrote this is alive, and uses this chamber as his ledger. He tucked the journal beneath his coat. Evidence, Watson, and dangerous evidence at that. Our inspection was cut short by a sound from above, the faint scrape of movement upon the stair. Holmes extinguished the lantern at once, plunging us into darkness. We waited, scarcely breathing. Steps descended, cautious, halting, then firmer. A faint glow appeared, spilling around the curve of the stair. Someone approached with a lantern. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "Remain still," he whispered. The glow grew brighter, then halted just beyond the doorway. A shadow moved upon the wall. We heard the rustle of paper, the shifting of objects. The intruder had entered the chamber. Holmes's patience held, but my heart thudded so loudly I feared discovery. The figure moved toward the coffer, knelt, and muttered a curse when finding it ajar. The journal, we realized, was what he sought. He poured through the pile, then rose sharply, as though sensing another presence. Holmes acted in that instant. With the swiftness of a striking snake, he snapped open his lantern, flooding the chamber with light. The intruder froze. For the briefest instant, I saw his face half shielded by the brim of a hat, features twisted in shock. He darted backward, knocking over a broken chair, and fled up the stair with astonishing speed. Holmes pursued, but the man had extinguished his lantern and vanished into the network of passages. We reached the landing, but found only silence. Holmes returned to the chamber, his expression grave. "We have confirmed much, Watson, though caught little. Our adversary keeps his ledger here. That means his enterprise is present, ongoing, and connected to Caldwell." He pocketed the journal securely. "This book, when deciphered, will expose him, but we must not reveal its loss until the time is ripe. He must believe his secret still hidden." We returned to the main house by way of the panel, emerging into the corridor like men who had wrestled with the very bowels of history. Holmes was silent until we reached our chamber. There, he laid the journal upon the table and turned its pages with surgical care. The writing was indeed modern columns of numbers, names disguised by initials, and curious symbols. Among them I recognized the mark we had seen upon the dagger's hilt. Holmes tapped the page. "Smuggling still. Watson, no, not of wool or wine. These figures speak of items smaller, swifter, more profitable. Perhaps jewels, perhaps contraband. Whatever the article, Caldwell Manor serves as the depot. Our thief is no idle phantom. He's a merchant of shadows." I asked. "And the family? Are they complicit?" Holmes's face grew hard. "That, Watson, remains to be proved. But the miniature, the silent spell, the whispers, these are the weapons of a foe who knows both the house and its hearts. Until we draw him into the open, none are free of suspicion." He closed the journal. "Tonight, Watson, the hunt begins in earnest. Caldwell Manor has shown us its secret chamber. Now we must force its phantom to reveal his face." Chapter 7. A trail of Holmes spent the forenoon enthroned at Lady Eleanor's escritoire. The purloined journal opened before him, a patient upon the operating table. He had requested pens, a pot of violet ink, blotting paper, and most peculiarly a shallow tray of sifted ash. Over this grey bed, he sprinkled tiny scraps he had trimmed from the journal's margins, arranging them by weight and curl as if they were iron filings, and he the lodestone, "You are composing a sonata out of soot," I ventured. "On the contrary," said he, not looking up. "I am listening to the rhythm of a hand. See here." The downward strokes bear more pressure than the up habit of a writer who grips his pen close to the nib. The figures 7 and 9 are continental, the S's long when hurried. It is a hand that prides itself on neatness, but trembles when speed is demanded. "Goring," I suggested, thinking of the elder man's precise nature. "You name an altitude when I asked for a pressure," Holmes murmured. "Let the letters speak before we ascribe them bodies." He had, in the hour previous, prized from the journal a logic of symbols. Next to dates were marks dagger, cross, crescent, and beside these, columns of numbers and initials, A, T, W, K, and, more telling, AG and EC. Holmes built his gloss aloud. Dagger signifies the passage, cross the west gallery, crescent the conservatory. The initials, not names entire. They are a clerk's expedients. AG might be Alistair Goring or Archegone. EC might be Edwin Caldwell or estate cash. Observe this entry. Dagger, 14th, week, 3, oil, 2. That is, through the passage on the 14th, coordination with Wickham, perhaps 3 duties or parcels, 2 flasks of lamp oil. Now this, cross, 15th, A1, mini, removed. The miniature, I breathed, most likely. And here, he tapped a later line where the ink had blotted. Cresk, 16th. AG, key, his eyes glinted. The conservatory and the key, precisely the window I admired for its obliging latch. At that moment the predicted blow fell. Mrs. Bligh entered, a sealed note upon a tray. Her stern face had whitened. "For your hands only, my lady," she said to Eleanor. It was pinned to the west gallery curtain. Lady Eleanor broke the seal with a steadier hand than I should have thought possible, read, and passed it to Holmes. He nodded to me, and I read, "Return the book or the house will burn. Send away your hound. Agree to my terms and your likeness returns. Refuse, and I shall take from you not a picture, but a name." Midnight, the conservatory. The characters were printed. Their clumsy capitals, the masquerade of a man who feared to betray his script. Holmes held the paper against the window. "Cheap rag. Village stationer," he said. "But see the impression upon the fibre letters, written on a sheet above, have ghosted here. There is a tail to the R, a hooked T, A to that leans. Our anonymous friend discards his hand only in the foreground." Goring, summoned by Lady Eleanor, read the note with compressed lips. Victor swore between his teeth. Edwin paled, then coloured, then paled again, as a man will who is at war with himself. Holmes folded the threat and slipped it into his pocket book. "You will forgive me if I decline to keep this appointment at midnight," he said. "Our adversary invites me to the Crescent in hopes the dagger may work elsewhere. We shall be present in both places." Our next hours were spent in the village, where Holmes, with that knack he possesses of turning strangers into informants and informants into allies, set about stitching the outskirts of the puzzle. At the stationer's, the proprietor, a spare man who smelt of cord and glue, recalled selling several packets of cheap notes to a gentleman from the big house I couldn't say which. Tidy glove, soft voice, paid exact. At the blacksmith's we learned, with less ambiguity, that a visitor had sought a skeleton key to a common walnut cabinet, and had paid with a bright foreign coin that made the smith's eyes shine. The man was of medium height, cloaked, hat brim low, and smoked a funny sweet cigarette. The coin? Holmes asked. "Like a Roman," the smith said, "with a head one side and the boat t'other." "A denarius," Holmes murmured as we left, or a modern counterfeit passed as a curiosity. Either way, a clever stain upon Goring's fingers, if one wished to mark them. You see the neatness, the Egyptian cigarette, the Roman coin, each a label pasted to a man's back. It is the very tidiness of the accusation that offends me. You think the trail was laid for us. For me, he said dryly. Our friend reads, and does not admire, the literature of detection. Back at the manor, Holmes set about the business of hands. He presented Lady Eleanor with a domestic ledger that required the signatures of all members of the household for purposes of inventory. Goring obliged with a thin, exact script, Victor with a bold, forward slanted hand, Edwin with tremulous neatness, Wickham with funereal loops, Mrs. Bligh with a firm, upright schoolroom style. From a respectful distance, I watched Holmes compare the trial entries with rubbings he had lifted from the journal by some magician's trick of graphite and light. "Not one of these is our ledgerist," he said at last in a tone of almost scholarly disappointment. "The clerk behind the journal masks within the house, but writes without its parade. Either a servant I have not yet sampled Thomas, the fair boy, perhaps, or a visitor who comes and goes by the green lanes." We walked the conservatory before dusk. The paving still held the faint reek of lamp oil. Upon the whitewash near the latch, a smudged thumb-sized oval, the print of a person who opens from the left. Holmes took from his pocket a little glass plate, pressed it gently to the smear, and stowed it like a beetle under glass. "Grease holds ridges," he said. "If I am lucky, the crescent will gift us a finger." Our return to the house was delayed by a curious episode. In the south passage near the stair to the kitchens, Holmes halted so abruptly that I near collided with him. He stooped, lifted the corner of a threadbare runner, and drew forth a folded paper, lodged in the crack of the floor no more than a flyleaf torn from some book. Across it was scrawled, "He will make you choose roof or a name. He wants both. Do not let them send me away. No signature. No hand one recognized." Holmes read it twice, then slipped it away. "Another voice," I said. "Or an echo," he replied. "This house is a choir, Watson. Some voices sing, and some are thrown by the arches. But note the pronoun, them. Our writer fears a they, not a he." Evening fell hard upon Caldwell. At Holmes's instruction, Victor remained demonstratively in the butler's pantry till near midnight, discoursing upon vintages with Wickham. Goring took his constitutional in the conservatory, as the note demanded of someone. Edwin retired early with a book, whose pages I later found uncut. Lady Eleanor kept to her room, and Mrs. Bligh prowled the corridors like a guardian with keys that chimed softly us for us. We divided ourselves as a surgeon divides labour. Holmes to the conservatory's shadowed gallery above, where a narrow catwalk overlooked the ferns. I to the west gallery, within earshot of the cabinet and the curtain that had borne the threat dot. At 12:15 I heard it, a panel's soft breath, the whisper of leather upon wood, the brush of a cloak. I held mine. A figure, darker than the dark, slid along the gallery wall. He did not go to the cabinet. He went to the newel at the stairhead and, with deft fingers, loosened the cap. From the hollow he drew a packet. The lantern glow he dared not unhood. He felt by habit. A letter changed hands with the unseen air. The cap settled. The ghost turned. I moved then. He sprang quick, calculating, and would have cast me headlong, had my shoulder not met his ribs with a force born of memory of Afghanistan. We struck the balustrade together. He flashed steel and narrow blade, quick as a tongue, scored my sleeve. I closed upon the arm. He twisted, slippery with some oil upon his glove, and tore free. Vanishing the way he had come with the silence of a cat, Holmes's whistle sounded from the conservatory, a note like a bird in alarm. I ran. In the glass house, the air was jungle warm. Below, amidst the ferns, Goring stood startled, his cane raised. Above, on the catwalk, Holmes crouched like a gargoyle. He used the upper door. Holmes called softly. A draught and an echo no more. "Did you have him?" "Briefly," I said, breathless. He drew a packet from the stairs hollow. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Oh, then the house has a post-box, back in our chamber." He laid upon the table the contents of the packet I had wrenched half free, a sheaf of papers, transfers, orders, and a letter of credit upon a London bank, each a tidy counterfeit with the elegance of truth. Receipts for coal vastly in excess of the manor's needs. An order upon the wine merchant for cases never delivered. A note to sell a townhouse in Belgravia, Lady Eleanor's, bearing a forged signature. So artful my heart leapt before reason steadied it. "You see the scheme," Holmes said quietly. "A slow bleeding under cover of haunting. A fire prepared to explain away discrepancies, a threat to a name to coerce a deed. Caldwell is to be emptied in the dark, and then burned at dawn. He opened his hand. Upon his palm lay a sliver of wax, impressed faintly with a device, a star about a dagger. Our ledgerist leaves the same sign upon his seals, he said. He is careful, swift, and vain. He believes himself one step ahead. Holmes looked up, and in his eye was that cold, clear light I have seen when a tiger scents the throat. Let him keep his pace, he said. Tomorrow we return his book, not the book, but a book I shall write for him. He will read my hand and come to collect what he thinks is his. And when he comes, Watson, the house will at last pronounce his name. Chapter 8. The deadly encounter, night following our discovery, was one of restless vigilance. Holmes had written with meticulous care a facsimile of the journal's incriminating pages, copying its symbols and figures so precisely that even my practiced medical eye could scarce discern the substitution. His intent was clear: to bait the unknown hand into revealing itself. The forged journal he placed within the secret chamber, the genuine one secured within his valise. Criminals, he said, as he tied the packet with rough cord, cannot resist returning to their nest. He will come, Watson, to count his coins and tally his secrets. He will find my counterfeit, and in reaching for it, he will touch the snare. The household went about the day in a haze of unease. Lady Eleanor moved like a pale wraith through the drawing-room. Mr. Goring spoke little. Victor grew impatient and stormed from chamber to chamber, while Edwin sat with a book he never read. His E. Holmes observed all with quiet detachment, the faintest smile playing at his lips whenever suspicion threatened to burst into accusation. The evening passed, and midnight approached once more. Holmes stationed himself near the gallery, while I, at his direction, lingered by the east corridor. The air was heavy, the silence of the manor broken only by the distant ticking of clocks. Then sudden, sharp a cry rang out. It was a man's voice, choked with alarm. Holmes and I converged at once upon the east wing. From a half-opened door issued the sounds of a struggle. Furniture overturned, a groan, and then a dull thud. We burst inside. The room belonged to Edwin Caldwell. He lay sprawled upon the carpet, his face bloodless, his shirt front stained by a crimson splash. A heavy candlestick, smeared with blood, had rolled to the hearth. The window stood wide, the curtains billowing in the night air. Alive, Watson? Holmes demanded. I dropped to my knees, feeling Edwin's pulse. It fluttered faintly beneath my fingers. Yes, concussed, but not gone. The wound is at the scalp, bleeding freely, but it may yet spare him. Holmes examined the room with rapid precision. He seized the candlestick, sniffed it, then tossed it aside. He bent to the carpet, tracing the drag of boots toward the window. The assailant struck swiftly, then fled. But fled where? We leaned from the casement. Below yawned the east lawn, wet with dew, yet in the lantern's gleam Holmes showed me the unmistakable impressions of boots, pressed deep into the turf. Medium height, pointed sole, he muttered. The same man who haunts these passages. He entered unseen, struck, and meant the blow to kill or silence. Victor had by now rushed in, his face livid. My brother, he cried, kneeling beside Edwin. By God, Holmes, who has done this? That, Holmes said gravely, is the very question. But mark this, the assailant chose Edwin, not yourself, not Goring, nor Lady Eleanor. Why Edwin? Victor's features twisted with rage. Because he is weak, vulnerable, a coward's target. Let me find the villain, and I'll see him hang. Holmes's eyes never left him. Perhaps, or perhaps Edwin knew too much. A frightened tongue may stumble upon truth. If so, silence would be the attacker's object. At that moment Lady Eleanor and Mr. Goring appeared, summoned by the commotion. Goring bent over Edwin with real or well-feigned concern. Lady Eleanor, pale and trembling, clutched Holmes's arm. This is murder attempted in my house. Mr. Holmes, you must save us. I shall endeavour, Holmes replied. But first we must keep Edwin alive. I dressed the wound, binding it tightly to stanch the bleeding. Edwin stirred faintly, his lips moving in broken whispers. At last he managed a word. Panel. Voices. Key. Then his head fell back into unconsciousness. Holmes straightened. There, Watson. Even half senseless, he speaks of the passages. He knew, or guessed, too much. Holmes turned to Goring and Victor. Gentlemen, I ask that no one leave this house. The blow was struck from within. The hand belongs to someone under this roof. Victor swore loudly. You think it one of us. I think nothing, Holmes said coldly. I know someone has lied. The footprints outside are fresh, yet every man here will swear he never left his bed. That is the lie, and it must be pierced. Holmes returned to the window, studying the footprints anew. The heel digs deeper than before, he murmured. Our man carried weight a body, perhaps, or a burden. Did he intend to carry Edwin out? No, the window's sill is too narrow. But he carried something, and he left in haste. The grass is bent sharply, the stride long. We shall follow, with Victor at his side, and myself close behind. Holmes traced the prints across the sodden lawn, through the orchard, and toward the stable yard. There, the trail ended, swept away by the trampling of hooves and men. Holmes stood still, his face unreadable in the lantern light. He has allies, he said at last. Someone in the stables, or among the servants, aids his flight. The house is not merely haunted, it is infiltrated. We returned to the manor, where Lady Eleanor awaited us in a state of terror. Holmes spoke with the calm assurance of a surgeon after a grim operation. Madam, your enemy grows desperate. He is struck openly, violently. That is the act of a man whose design nears exposure. We must therefore act with speed. I shall keep watch by Edwin's side tonight. Watson will remain also. The house must be guarded, for I fear another attempt. And so the vigil began. Through the long hours of the night, Holmes sat like a sentinel by Edwin's bed, his keen eyes glinting in the candlelight. I tended the young man's wound, praying his strength would endure. From time to time Edwin stirred and muttered, but his words were incoherent. Yet Holmes leaned forward at every whisper, as though each fragment might yield a clue. Near dawn, when the house was grey with the first light of day, Holmes rose at last. He placed his hand upon my shoulder. The game quickens. Watson, our adversary has revealed his ruthlessness. We must be ready, for he will not hesitate again. Today, I shall press him until the mask falls. The house itself has betrayed its secret. Soon the man will betray his own. I looked upon Edwin's pale form, the bandage stained, the breath shallow, and shivered. For the first time I felt that Caldwell Manor was no longer a stage of intrigue, but a battlefield where life itself hung by a thread. Chapter 9. Holmes reveals the Webbit was with the gravest countenance that Holmes summoned the household to the great drawing room that evening. A storm had gathered without. The wind rattled the casements, and rain beat upon the long windows, as though the very heavens demanded entry. Within, a fire roared in the vast hearth, casting the family portraits in fitful light. Lady Eleanor sat rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. Beside her, Mr. Goring's features bore the marble calm of a man resolved to endure any trial. Victor paced restlessly, his fists clenched, while Edwin, pale but recovering, reclined in a chair, a bandage still circling his brow. The servants, at Holmes's insistence, lined the room's periphery, their eyes wide with mingled fear and curiosity. Holmes stood before the mantel, tall and austere, the journal clasped in his long fingers. His gaze moved from face to face, and when he spoke, his voice cut the air like steel. Ladies and gentlemen, the enigma of Caldwell Manor is ended. What you have taken for whispers of the supernatural, for accidents and terrors born of imagination, is nothing more and nothing less than a calculated campaign of deceit. Every vanished trinket, every silent spell, every shadow in the corridor has been the work of a deliberate hand. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Victor halted mid-stride. Edwin's lips parted. Holmes raised the journal. This book, kept in the hidden chamber beneath your feet, is the ledger of our phantom. Here are the records of his comings and goings, his thefts, his expenditures, even the oil for his lantern. Here, too, is the account of a miniature stolen, a bell disabled, and threats written to break Lady Eleanor's spirit. It is the map of a criminal enterprise and the key to its unmasking. Goring stirred at last. You speak as though you had already judged the culprit. I have, said Holmes simply. He crossed the room, laid the journal upon the great table, and opened it to a marked page. Observe these entries. On the 14th, a rendezvous in the passage with Wickham noted as WK. An attempt to frame the butler. On the 15th, the removal of the miniature. On the 16th, an entry marked key in the conservatory with the initials AG. Every mark, every letter, was meant to draw suspicion along a particular path. But it is too neat, too convenient. It is the work not of chance, but of calculation designed to implicate Mr. Goring. All eyes turned to Lady Eleanor's brother, who met the scrutiny without blinking. And do you suggest I bludgeon my nephew as well? Holmes's eyes gleamed. No, sir. The blow that felled Edwin was not struck by you, but it was struck to silence him because Edwin had stumbled upon a truth. He spoke of voices at the panel, of a key. And so he was attacked. The assailant believed his suspicions dangerous. Edwin shifted uneasily. He began. But Holmes silenced him with a gesture. Permit me, Mr. Edwin. You see, the entries in the journal are forged, not by Mr. Goring, but by the hand of one who knows how to mimic and to mislead. I compared the tremor of the writing with signatures taken from each of you. None matched totally, but one betrayed itself by hesitation. In your innocent ledger, Mr. Edwin, the loops falter when speed is required. The same falter mars these pages. You, sir, are the ledgerist. A gasp rose from the company. Edwin's face drained of colour. No, he cried. It cannot, it is not. Holmes advanced a step, his voice relentless. You feared the future. You feared a life bound to the annuity, while your brother inherited all. So you contrived to sap the manor of its wealth, to sell its assets by stealth, to drain its accounts. You used the passages to move unseen, the servants as unwitting scapegoats, the superstitions of the staff as your veil. The miniature you stole not for gain, but to torture Lady Eleanor's heart and so cow her into compliance. And when your half-senseless mutterings threatened to expose you, you struck yourself down deliberately clumsy. A blow calculated to divert suspicion and excite pity. Victor thundered. By heaven, and made to seize his brother. But Holmes raised a commanding hand. Peace, sir. The proof lies not in passion, but in fact. Watson, if you please, the paper we found in the south passage. I produced the torn flyleaf Holmes had uncovered. He spread it on the table. These words, do not let them send me away, are in the same hand as the journal. The plea of a man who knows his conspiracy cannot endure exposure. And here, he held aloft a small glass plate, is the print taken from the conservatory latch, smudged in lamp oil. This morning I compared it with the ridges of each present, pressed into wax. Only one matched the left thumb of Mr. Edwin Caldwell. Edwin buried his face in his hands. I only meant, Holmes's tone softened, though his words remained pitiless. You meant to wrest from fate what the law of inheritance denied you. You armed yourself with deceit, with theft, with fear, but the very tidiness of your lies betrayed you. No true ghost keeps a ledger, Mr. Caldwell. No phantom marks his initials beside his crimes. Lady Eleanor rose, her composure breaking at last. My nephew, my own sister's son, why did you not come to me? I would have helped you. Edwin's reply was broken, scarcely audible. Help would have been charity. I wanted more. I wanted Caldwell. Holmes bowed slightly. And Caldwell would have burned for it. Already you prepared the oil, the excess coal, the forgeries to cover the thefts. You would have set the fire, blamed mischance, and risen from the ashes as rescuer and heir. But you mistook whispers for silence. The house itself betrayed you. There was silence, broken only by the hiss of rain upon the windows. Victor stood thunderstruck. Goring's face betrayed neither triumph nor grief. Lady Eleanor wept quietly into her handkerchief dot. At last Holmes turned to the servants. You may go. Justice belongs to the law, not to the mob. They dispersed, whispering, casting backward glances at the ruined figure of Edwin Caldwell. Holmes addressed Lady Eleanor in a gentler tone. "Madam, your house is restored to you, though scarred. It is my hope that with time and truth those scars may heal. Then, to the rest, I shall leave Edwin to your discretion until the proper authorities arrive. My duty ends when the lie is torn from its wrappings." He closed the journal, slid it into his coat, and with that simple motion, the enigma of Caldwell Manor was ended. Chapter 10. Justice and closer ready morning that followed our grim assembly broke clear and sharp. The storm swept away as though nature herself had desired a cleansing of the air. Yet within Caldwell Manor, the atmosphere remained heavy, for truth, however necessary, seldom arrives without wounds. Edwin Caldwell was confined under the watch of Wickham and a stout footman. He made no further attempt at denial. Indeed, he spoke little, save to ask now and then for water or to mutter of schemes gone awry. His face, pale and drawn, seemed that of a man astonished by the ruin of his own contrivances. Holmes, after dispatching a telegram to the local constabulary, busied himself with the practical clearing of the case. He led the inspector through the secret stair and the hidden chamber, displaying with icy clarity the journal, the forged papers, and the traces of oil and footprints that bound Edwin's guilt as tightly as iron manacles. The officer, though respectful, could not hide his admiration. "You've handed us the villain trussed and labelled, Mr. Holmes. If every case were as plain, my post would be idle." Holmes gave a dry smile. "Do not mistake clarity for plainness, Inspector. A spider's web may seem a tangle to the fly, but to the weaver it is geometry." Lady Eleanor bore the ordeal with dignity. When Edwin was at last led away, she neither wept nor railed, but merely inclined her head in weary resignation. To Victor she said quietly, "See that his name is not reviled in the village. Let the law judge, not gossip." To Goring she murmured, "Thank you for your steadfastness." Victor, though his anger had not wholly abated, agreed. "He's still blood. Whatever he has done, I'll not see the Caldwell name dragged further." Mr. Goring, impassive as marble, replied only, "Justice requires no commentary." That evening, Holmes and I prepared to depart. Our carriage awaited in the drive, the horses stamping in the cool air. Lady Eleanor accompanied us to the door, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "you have given me back my house, though at a cost I scarce imagined. How may I thank you?" Holmes bowed slightly. "Your thanks are ample, madam. I seek no reward, but the satisfaction of seeing truth prevail. Yet let me urge you, restore light to this place, throw open your halls, mend your ties with the village, banish secrecy. A house that broods upon itself becomes a nest for shadows." Her lips trembled into the faintest of smiles. "You speak like a physician of souls as well as crimes." Holmes inclined his head, but did not answer. The journey back to London was a quiet one. The countryside rolled past in tranquil shades, but my mind remained upon Caldwell Manor, the long corridors, the hidden stair, the pale face of Edwin Caldwell as his deceit unravelled. At length I turned to Holmes. "One thing puzzles me still. Why did Edwin, timid as he was, venture into such perilous deception? Was greed alone sufficient to steal him?" Holmes lit his pipe before replying. The smoke curled in the lamplight of the carriage. "Greed, yes, but also envy, which is greed with a mask. Edwin lacked the boldness of Victor, the authority of Goring, the command of Lady Eleanor. He feared obscurity more than failure. Thus he forged a kingdom in the dark, convincing himself that cleverness could replace courage. Many a man ruins himself by trying to outwit inheritance rather than endure it, and the blow upon his own head." I asked, "It was a ruse, then?" "Undoubtedly. He struck himself to appear a victim, thinking to disarm suspicion. But self-inflicted wounds betray themselves, the angle, the force, the restraint. It was clever, but not clever enough." Holmes drew deeply upon his pipe. "Mark this, Watson, the most dangerous criminal is not the hardened villain, but the ordinary soul who convinces himself that necessity excuses crime. Edwin's downfall lay not in his cunning, but in the vanity that he could weave lies as neatly as truth. Vanity is the most fragile mask of all. For a time we travelled in silence, lulled by the rhythm of wheels upon the road. At last Holmes spoke again, more softly. You recall Lady Eleanor's words, that it was not death, but something colder, that stalked her halls. She was right. Death, at least, is final. Deceit lingers, gnaws, and corrupts. It is colder than the grave, because it drains warmth from the living. Caldwell Manor will recover from its storm, but not without scars. I made no reply, for the truth of his observation struck too deep. I thought of Lady Eleanor walking those echoing galleries, her family diminished, her trust forever shaken, and I thought of Edwin, a man undone less by ambition than by the bitterness of believing himself forgotten. As the lamps of London came into view and the familiar outlines of Baker Street drew near, Holmes tapped the ashes from his pipe. Another case concluded. Watson, he said, yet never concluded, for men will always raise new phantoms in the corridors of their greed. It is our lot to chase them, and to remind the world that the supernatural is but the natural in disguise, and that truth, however hidden, has a habit of rising like smoke through the cracks. I nodded, silently grateful once more to be companion to a mind so precise, so unrelenting, and yet so curiously humane. Thus ended the affair of Caldwell Manor, a case not of spectres, but of shadows more dreadful, for they were cast not by ghosts, but by the human heart. It was some weeks later, as winter deepened over London, that I read in the papers of Edwin Caldwell's sentencing. The law was merciful, granting him years of confinement rather than the rope. Yet mercy cannot mend a heart undone by envy. Holmes, when I remarked upon it, merely said, "Better a living lesson than a dead one." Watson, Caldwell Manor, I am told, stands quieter now. The servants walk its halls without dread. The windows blaze more often with light, and Lady Eleanor has taken pains to open the house to her tenants, banishing secrecy with hospitality. Yet I cannot think of that estate without recalling the chill of its passages, the whispered voices, and the pale face of a man who mistook cleverness for wisdom. Holmes was right. The true enigma was not in the stone walls of Caldwell, but in the fragile, haunted chambers of the human heart.